So I thought one thing that might be fun to do is go through some of the Reddit comments that I received over the last week or two and answer those comments in a kind of FAQ style manner. So let's have a look at some of these. All right, let's start with one that I get asked a lot, which is the question, or a variation of the question asked by War Story Guy, who says, does it work with Index? Page only says Vive and Oculus. So when I started making this game, the only VR headsets that existed were the Vive and the Oculus. And in the last 3 years, there's been an explosion of different headsets. And now every single person wants to know if this game will work on their specific headset. And so the answer is that while this was designed specifically for Vive and Oculus, it will work on any PC VR headset, which includes Index. At this time, it doesn't work for Quest, although I might make it compatible in the future. And if it's on another headset, then your guess is as good as mine. Dan OSG says, I would absolutely be killing anyone even remotely good and sparing the evil. You would be surprised, maybe, at how many people on the internet are just really proud to be psychopaths. I feel like I'm going to sort of accidentally move away from making this a Q&A and just start mocking people's comments. But Norseman says, cool concept. As a gamer, there is almost no circumstance when I ever feel empathy for an NPC. My horse in Breath of the Wild is the one I'm attached to. So, I'm not making a game where you execute beloved pets because I expect that would be less of a dilemma. The Walking Trip says, I was born to execute, forced to play video games. Yikes. Nout I can get into. This person says, I was just thinking about this recently. How did executioners mentally make it through the day? They were as human as we are, and they had to chop people's heads off day in and day out. Thanks for making this. It looks very polished and beautifully executed. Winking face. It's a good question. Historical executioners generally made it through the day on the strength of their faith, the fact that they believed that what they were doing was a valuable service, and also they were getting paid to do it. Often as well, in a lot of circumstances, the executioner didn't have a choice about being an executioner. Usually you would be an executioner because you'd hit rock bottom in society and you had no other choice, or because your father was an executioner and you were already at rock bottom. It was very hard to raise yourself up from what was considered to be a dishonorable career in early modern society. But that said, how did they make it through the day in terms of the psychological trauma? Really, your guess is as good as mine. We can only go on the evidence of what they've written. But it's, execution is not the only job where killing is part of the job. Soldiers do this every day, and they don't all have mental breakdowns. Interstellar Reddit says, I will execute the whole fucking crowd. Alright, mate. Lord Gaben's Prophet asks, will there be variation in available execution methods and victims? Would also be cool to have an additional element. If you botch the execution, there is some effect. So there's only beheading in my game. The most common forms of execution were beheading and hanging. I thought about including hanging, but ultimately decided against it because it in a way is too easy. A hangman, the hardest part is sort of tying the knot, and then after that it's just a case of pulling a lever and waiting for somebody to die. I didn't think it would give enough of that there wasn't enough of an interactive element. I didn't feel like it would feel visceral enough to invoke the sort of response that I'm looking for. And additionally, with the sword, there is an element of skill to it, which is an interesting sort of way of making this game a game, if you will, because you can execute well and you can execute badly depending on your swing, how fast you swing, how accurately you swing. He says it would be cool to have an additional element if you botch the execution. If you do botch the execution, then you won't be paid that day, and if you botch it more than once, then you will be fired because you are a bad executioner. Et from BC asks, what age restriction is there? Adults only, whatever is classified as adult in your country, so probably 18 plus. This game is not for minors because it's disturbing. Was any of this inspired by the diary of that Italian executioner Giovanni Bugatti? No, I'm going to have to check him out. It's primarily inspired by the diary of Franz Schmidt, executioner for Nuremberg from the late 1500s to the early 1600s. I highly recommend checking out a book called The Faithful Executioner by Joel F. Harrington. Great book, and you'll learn everything you need to know about being an executioner in Nuremberg in the 15th century. Could you, in theory, says Flamingo Seeker, kill them before they tell you their story, asking for a friend? Yes, you could, but that kind of goes against the whole idea of delivering redemption, which is what a medieval execution was based around. The idea being that even the most hardened of criminals, this is a very Christian idea, the idea of forgiveness. The idea was that even the most hardened of criminals, in their final act, would repent and beg forgiveness from God, and they would be granted that, and not burn in hell forever. So if you went against this narrative of redemption that the state is trying to impress, it kind of undermines the nobility of the act of public execution. I know it sounds very strange to modern ears to think of it as anything more than brutality, but it did serve a religious purpose back in the day, or historically. So yes, you could kill them, but the crowd would most likely be unhappy. And in my game, the crowd will be unhappy, and also you won't get paid, and you want to get paid. Dr. Zoidberg 590 says, what's with the colour scheme? A lot of people have asked what's with the colour scheme, and I found it's quite divisive. The majority of people seem to love it, and then there's a few people who just don't like it, or they don't get it, and that's totally okay. There are a lot of medieval looking games out there. It's a common setting and a common aesthetic, and I wanted to do something that would differentiate Sentenced a little bit, give it something more of a stylistic personality of its own. In addition, people are very used to seeing gore in video games, and I thought by offsetting the colours and making it slightly unreal, it might make people think about what they're seeing twice, rather than sort of dismissing it as being gamey. Whether that theory turns out to be true, we may never know. But also, I just liked these colours and I wanted to do something different. So yeah, let's say it's an artistic choice. So Tiago T says, do the statistics you collect take into account the same people going through multiple playthroughs, or would that all be separate data points? Are you just collecting simple data like who died, or do you collect more stuff like recording movements and stuff? If you collect more stuff, have you taken the GDPR into consideration? So I'm only recording data for the first time that people play through the game, or I'm only recording the result of the first time people play through, because I strongly suspect that people will replay it in order to experience alternate endings or to find things that they didn't find the first time. My thought process is that in real life, you never get to replay your decisions. Life can only be lived once forward, and there's no rehearsal. You just have to get out there and do it. So I wanted to make the consequences slightly more impactful in Sentence by having players having the game only record the first time that they play through, because that's sort of the most authentic. They can obviously replay the game as many times as they like in order to see alternate outcomes. But yeah, I felt like that was the best option. He also says, are you just collecting simple data like who died, or are you collecting more stuff like recording movements? I'm only collecting simple data for now, because I don't know what use I would have for all this data, to be honest. Someone might be interested in it, but I don't need that much. It's all good. And he says, are you taking the GDPR into consideration? I'm not collecting any personal data whatsoever. Everything that comes through to me is anonymized. I just get a binary number based that says what people did to complete the game. So it's not an issue with the GDPR, because I'm not handling any personal data. Luigi311 says, sounds like a challenge. What if I cut off a pinky or a toe? What about his/her penis? Ignoring everything that's wrong with this question, it's actually very hard to make skinned meshes in games. That is to say, characters completely destructible. It's quite time consuming, and because there are a lot of individual characters in the game, the only bits that actually come off is the head. So it's not a dismemberment simulator, only a decapitating simulator. It still sounds bad, but due to technical restraints, there's a limit to how many bits you can chop off, is what I'm saying. Scarcer69 says, please bring this to Quest. Looks like a very good game. I don't know how to bring things to Quest. I am going to look into it post-launch and see what I can do. Quest is the headset which is standalone, doesn't require any. It doesn't require a PC. So, and it's got its own platform. So, I'd like to get this to as wide an audience as possible, and I will see how feasible that is after the initial launch on PC. Simon 7109 says, I am not familiar with the history of this. Executioners only used swords? Question. Yes. Maybe not all over the world. So there's a very typical historical depiction of the executioner as being a man who wears a black hood to hide his identity, and executes people with a big old axe. Now this is mostly a fabrication. I'm not sure where it began, but it was it came about through 19th century romantic authors, this whole idea of the executioner as a black hooded figure who was hiding his personality. The historical period and location where I'm setting the game, which is sort of Germanic a Germanic region within the Holy Roman Empire, an executioner would not hide their face. And in fact, they would sort of wear the equivalent of their Sunday best to an execution, which was usually colourful and padded clothing with a fancy hat. In regards to the sword, executioners using swords, yes, so the reason they would use a sword rather than an axe is because you are, with both you're making a chopping motion to take off a head, but with a sword, the blade is longer, so it's easier not to miss, essentially. And this Simon 7109 also asked why the sword was flat tipped. That would be because you are never, the pointed tip on a sword is used for piercing and thrusting motions, but in an execution you're only ever chopping, you're never thrusting, so the tip is redundant. Deus Ex Marina asks, can I turn the sword on myself? That's actually the one thing I didn't think of, is suicidal executioners. Maybe I will put that in. Bluesmo says, just make us execute dogs instead, with that innocent looking smiley face. Why? So some animal says, we should also sit in on the person's trial. I think we should be able to cast doubt in the opposite direction as well. That would make you a judge, not an executioner. So the game isn't about deciding the fate of these people. Their fate has been decided by judges and lords before they get to you. Now, just because their fate has been decided by someone else does not mean that you are powerless to stop it. So we've got a good one here. Subdep says, how do we know this isn't just a control system for a Boston Dynamics robot that is actually executing people in some remote part of the world like Ender's Game? Damn it, you've rumbled me. This whole game was funded by Boston Dynamics in order to carry out their executing people in a remote part of the world conspiracy. So, well, I guess I will, the jig's up. So CapCrash33 says, hi, what tools did you use to build it? Thanks. So primarily this was built using the game engine Unity, with a plugin called Playmaker to handle the scripting in a visual style. In addition, I used a VR plugin called Newton VR, which helped with some of that stuff. And then, a whole bunch of other Unity plugins, which I've gone into more detail in my previous blogs. But those were the main ones. In terms of making the art, ZBrush was my primary sculpting tool, and Maya was my primary tool for constructing the environments. Substance Painter was my primary tool for the texturing and materials. In terms of animation, some of the animations are stock animations from Mixamo.com, and the rest were motion captured by me in my bedroom using a little setup I made using Vive motion trackers. GHS2 says, don't be fooled, it's a sociopath test. Data directly to local police stations. It's true, if you obey, you will get arrested. There's no doubt about it. The guy who pointed out that this was all a Boston Dynamics conspiracy theory earlier was correct, and also I'm selling it to local police stations. Andrew 1431 says, damn, are your animations mocapped? Yes, they are, as I mentioned a few moments ago, and thank you for noticing. Voice says, and I love this comment, anyone can become a murderer, if a cool enough sword is put into their hands. We will find out, voice, and that's why I'm making this game. Another good one from Tebler here, who says, interesting idea, but wouldn't the actions of players be totally skewed by the fact we have all killed hundreds of people in video games? Yes, I think that you're probably right. So, that's why I'm expecting a higher rate of obedience than disobedience. So, let's find out. I would be really interested to see how non-gamers play this game. But I'm not sure how I would ever get that data. It would be great to do some sort of live demonstration with members of the public of Sentence at some point. But since everybody's locked down, I haven't really been thinking about public demonstrations of the game at this point in time. RL33SD says, this looks amazing, love the concept. How long have you been working on this? It looks super polished. I've been working on it for 3 years now. There's your answer. That's the short answer. The long answer is that I've been working a full-time job, saving up money, and then taking time off to work on the game over the course of 3 years. So the amount of time I've been working full-time on this is probably closer to 1.5 years. Bruh 4667 says, why wouldn't I kill them? They're simply code in a fictional video game. Why indeed? Why would you care about any work of fiction, bruh? Alright, that's enough internet for today. You've had your however many minutes this video turns out to be. And I've had enough reading comments on Reddit. So thank you once again for joining me. Please, as always, wishlist the game. Follow me on all the Twitter and Patreon and whatnot for updates. And thank you for tuning in. Goodbye.